Good morning. My name is Joe, as most of you know, and my pronouns are he and him, and when I was a kid, King David was my superhero. While other kids were watching Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or playing with Transformers or flipping through the pages of X-Men and Daredevil, I was reading the Bible, using my imagination to picture and act out the adventures of guys like Jacob and Joshua and Samson and Ehud, the left-handed assassin. For real. It wasn't that my parents were against superheroes in general. I had Superman pajamas, and my mom safety pinned that towel cape around my neck so that I could fly and leap tall buildings in a single bound. I didn't ask Leo to wear his cape today, but I'm not surprised. The apple doesn't fall far. It was mostly for my family about time and availability. We were always in church. The Bible was right there, and these stories and characters were awesome. Plus, my grandma worked at the local Christian bookstore, so if anyone needed a Joseph and the Coat of Many Colors action figure, we had the hookup. For real, I have that one. Bible stories were at the heart of my childhood fantasies. And why not? It has heroes and villains, epic battles, heists, mystery, drama, supernatural powers, beauty and vengeance and underdogs and justice. It's great stuff. You just have to skim past the extended genealogies and detailed descriptions of priestly rituals and ignore the scholarly debates about historical accuracy and hermeneutics. Somehow we religious folks make the Bible seem dull and dry. But it's definitely not. The good parts, the legends of Israel, are awesome. And the biggest hero of them all, the Tony Stark of the biblical Avengers, is King David. You know this guy. Pulled from obscurity, the runt of his family, the shepherd boy turned giant slayer. As a young man, David was chosen by the prophet Samuel to replace the troubled first king of Israel, King Saul. David rose to fame by his fearless takedown of the giant Goliath. And then he soothed the troubled mind of King Saul with his music and poetry. When King Saul grew jealous of David's growing popularity in the court, David went into exile. He lived like Robin Hood, roaming the wilderness, defending the common people with a band of elite warriors. When Saul was eventually killed in battle against foreign invaders, David was the clear choice to lead the kingdom, and he united Israel in ways that Saul never could. David led the army. He defended the borders. He brought security and unity through military strength. He made careful alliances with local and international leaders, securing trade and bringing wealth through stability and partnership. And he built stuff, or caused it to be built. David conquered and then expanded the fortress of Zion. He made the surrounding city of Jerusalem his capital and then built it into an international center for trade, with a massive palace for himself, of course. And throughout his life, David continued to make music and write poetry, so much that he is credited for writing nearly half of the 150 poems in the book of Psalms. King David's reign was the height of power and wealth and culture for the unified nation of Israel. I haven't actually seen the House of David show on Prime, but a lot of the images we'll be seeing today come from that, and it looks interesting. We don't actually know much about David from a historical perspective, outside of the biblical records. And we do know that, as history happens, stories like these tend to be exaggerated and skewed to the advantage of whichever group is writing the histories, which is fine. The stories themselves are full of meaning beyond our modern idol of perceived accuracy or factuality. And that is one of those dry discussions that I warned about earlier. King David is the hero, the ideal, the model ruler, the quintessential human, the man after God's own heart. That's one of the titles that I learned for King David, drawn from a slight misinterpretation of 1 Samuel 13, verse 14. That is another dull rabbit trail that we won't go down today. Regardless, David is presented as this loyal leader, loyal to God, a man who has God's approval. He's God's beloved, God's favorite, a man who reflected the very heart of God. And at the same time, confoundingly, David did a whole bunch of things that make me really, really uncomfortable. Along with being a hero, King David was problematic. As a leader, he was arrogant. He was a tyrant. He was domineering. As an artist, he was self-absorbed, narcissistic even. As a man, he was a brutally violent warrior, a womanizer, a polygamist and an adulterer, a slave owner, a murderer. By modern standards, King David was authoritarian and abusive. I wouldn't vote for this guy for my condo board, let alone put him in charge of a country. And yet, he's the man after God's own heart. There's something about him that is worth paying attention to, even learning from and being inspired by. This is not to justify or minimize David's sins and abuses. I hope it's clear that we stand against those kind of abuses, and we try to hold our leaders to much higher standards today. Christianity has done a lot of harm over the centuries by empowering leaders very much in the mold of King David, making excuses for their bad behavior and justifying their abuses because of their wealth or their charisma or because they give us access to power. Perhaps you can think of a modern example or two. So part of me wants to condemn David outright. I would be glad to preach a sermon detailing his misconduct and warning against that kind of abusive masculinity, that kind of corrupt leadership. David might represent the glory days of the kingdom approach to the people of God, but he is a flawed and I would say failed leader and a negative example. That's one of the beautiful things about the life of Jesus Christ, actually, how he is held up as the son of David. But Jesus subverts that designation. He does not follow in David's footsteps. Jesus succeeds where David fails. He rejects David's abuses and he undoes the corruption. Jesus is the anti-David. He's the Prince of Peace to David's Lord of War. And it's Jesus, not David, that we are meant to follow. So I want to be careful about celebrating King David too much. However, I think we're also mature enough to handle some nuance here, to be able to see the character of King David as a whole person, in context, flaws and gifts, negative examples and positive contributions. I think that we can reject what needs to be rejected and also learn from and embrace the good parts. So as a biblical example, King David is both problematic and meaningful. Can we handle that this morning? I've got 3 stories of David to highlight, 3 virtues worth giving our attention. First up, the story we heard in the children's time and the scripture reading. In case you missed it, I will recap. When David became king, there was no true central location for the religion of Israel. But now that David was king, he was unifying and solidifying everything. He captured the fortress of Zion, he expanded the city of Jerusalem, and made it his capital. And now, the capstone to his career, he's bringing the sacred Ark of the Covenant into the capital city. That would tie everything together. This would be the symbol that God was present with David, that God was present in the capital, that David had God's blessing, finally at home in the city of David. And David was excited about that. David brought the ark up from the house of Obed-Edom to Jerusalem with rejoicing. When the bearers of the ark of Yahweh took their first 6 steps, he sacrificed a bull and a fatted calf. David, wearing a linen ephod, danced before Yahweh with all his might, while he and his whole house of Israel brought up the ark of Yahweh with shouts and the sound of trumpets. David was so excited about this that he couldn't contain his enthusiasm, and he turned the processional into his personal dance party. I don't know that I've ever been that excited about something. That level of emotion tends to make me freeze more than move. But I'm picturing wedding dances, the fans storming the field after championship games, tears of joy at big occasions. Passion is the word that I'm giving it. Longings met, goals achieved, the impossible being made possible, sheer joy and wonder and relief and pleasure. This moment with King David seems pretty sincere. It's pure emotion just taking over. And that's often how David is presented in these biblical stories. A man of passion, heart on his sleeve, living his emotions and trusting God to meet him there. David shared his heart with God, every feeling, high or low. And there's something very bright and cozy about belonging with someone who has seen your whole heart. Do you want that? I know I do. Being seen, being known, and belonging fully. That's the core of our humanity to me. And then there's the opposite experience, sharing your whole heart and being met with caution, disapproval, embarrassment, contempt. Michal, David's wife, she saw David's passion and she responded with shame. When David returned home to greet his household, Michal met him and said, "Well, didn't the ruler of Israel put on a show of dignity today, exposing himself in front of his servants' handmaids, as any vulgar clown might expose himself?" You recognize that voice? I know I do. I've met a lot of Michals, a lot of them in churches, unfortunately. The deacon frowning at me as a kid, "Don't run in the sanctuary." The senior pastor insisting that the youth worship band needs to keep the volume down on the guitars. This is worship, not a rock concert. The quiet stares at someone crying or oversharing or dancing. Keep it together. Nobody wants to see that in church. I'm glad we're pretty good about public displays of emotion at Wildwood these days. I mean, other than the raising your hands while you're singing. Don't do that, but cry all you want. But still, a lot of us have we've internalized these voices. We put limits on our experiences of passion. We control ourselves in church. And certainly we limit the expressions of our emotion. And that's okay. Passion takes many forms and it does not always need to be public. But I like that King David gives us permission to not be afraid of our passion. He's not ashamed of his emotions. His passion is sincere and it invigorates him. David replied to Michal, "I was celebrating before the Lord, who chose me over your father and his entire family, who appointed me leader over the Lord's people, over Israel, and I will celebrate before the Lord again." Passion brings energy, release, motivation, connection, joy. Sometimes you just gotta dance. What do you think of passion as a virtue? Where do you see passion as a gift in our world, in yourself? A second virtue of King David is strength. The most famous David story is, of course, his fight with the giant Goliath. In those days, the tribes of Israel were attempting to consolidate their hold on the land of Canaan, and their neighbors were doing the same thing, fighting back and forth to gain territory and advantages in status and wealth. And in this case, an army of Philistines threatened to invade the territory of Israel. King Saul rallied the army of Israel to defend their borders. The armies met on two opposite hills, with a valley in between. As the two sides stared at each other down, the Philistines sent out their champion, Goliath of Gath, a legendary warrior. Some accounts list him at over 9 feet tall, others say over 6 feet tall. Giant of a man, either way. Massive armor, deadly weapons. Goliath challenged King Saul to send out a champion to face him, a single combat to the death. This was a simple challenge aimed directly at King Saul. Saul himself was a famously tall man, head and shoulders taller than most people. And this was his opportunity to show up for his people, to stand toe-to-toe with their rivals, defend them with his body. This was why they wanted a king in the first place. But Saul was terrified. He backed down. He hid in his tent. And nobody else in Israel's camp was willing to face the giant either. Nobody except the young man, David. At that point, David was probably in his mid to late teens. He was a shepherd, not a soldier. He had snuck his way to the battlefront by offering to take supplies to his older brothers in the army. And when he got to the battle scene, he saw Goliath down in the valley, demanding this duel of champions, shouting his daily insults against Israel and their God. When David saw that no one on Israel's side gave a response, he went straight to King Saul to volunteer. David had no qualifications, no training as a soldier, but as a shepherd, he had protected his sheep from lions and bears. He'd killed them with his bare hands, or so David told the king. This human giant would be no different, David declared, because it's not the power of the man that matters. It is the power of God. David saw that something had to be done. It wasn't about him, it was about God, and he might as well be the one to do it. King Saul was impressed, or shamed at least, and he let David go to meet the giant. David refused the king's armor and sword. He took only his shepherd's staff, his slingshot, and 5 smooth stones. You know how this goes. David and Goliath traded insults, with David proclaiming, "You come against me with sword, spear, and scimitar, but I come against you in the name of Adonai, the God of armies, the one you've insulted. This day my God will deliver you into my hand." And then David, charged at Goliath, swinging his sling, and he loosed a single stone directly into the unarmored spot on Goliath's forehead. And the giant fell to the ground, dead. And David took Goliath's giant sword and cut off his giant head. And Israel won the day, not on the strength of their army, but on the faith and skill of one brave, faith-filled young man. What do we do with this story? I know it's violent. That makes most of us uncomfortable. We Mennonites are not people of the sword. But there's something compelling, honorable, essential about the strength of David, standing up for what is right, defending the vulnerable, defeating evil. That's good, right? In this particular story, the cause is just, and the strength comes from God, doesn't it? I'm a pacifist. I don't like the violence of this story. I genuinely believe that nonviolence offers better long-term solutions than cutting off the heads of my enemies. Even in this story, the descendants of the Israelites and their neighbors are still killing each other over the right to live in this very same land. This violence solved nothing. And yet, perhaps strength can be separated from violence. Again, there's nuance here. There's a mile of gray space between avoiding conflict and killing everyone that we come against. Our relationship with violence is complicated, but strength, we need that. Strength brings confidence, stability, health, safety for the weak, courage to do hard things. It brings growth and vibrance and life. Sometimes we've got to face the things that scare us, stand up for what we know is right. David models that well most of the time. What do you think of the virtue of strength? Where do you see strength as a gift in our world and in yourself? One more virtue of King David, grace. After the thrilling defeat of Goliath, David's relationship with King Saul got complicated. Everybody knew that David had stood up to the giant while Saul backed away. Saul himself knew that the prophet Samuel had withdrawn his support from King Saul and had gone as far as anointing David to be the next king of Israel instead of Saul's son, Jonathan. So these two were opposed to each other, but still David lived at the palace. He was best friends with Jonathan. He was married to Saul's daughter, Michal. Awkward. Eventually, Saul decided that David had to be killed, but David escaped into the wilderness along with his band of elite soldiers. And as I said, for years, David lived in exile, doing his Robin Hood thing, while Saul went back and forth between fighting off the Philistines, chasing David, and trying to rule this kingdom that he knew was slipping away from him. One time, King Saul led 3,000 soldiers into the wilderness to hunt for David. And one day, Saul felt the call of nature and went into a cave to relieve himself. As it happened, the cave that he chose as a bathroom was the very cave where David and his 600 soldiers were using as a base. So they were at the back of the cave while Saul was doing his business towards the front. And David's soldiers figured out who it was. And they told David, "This is your chance. Go and kill this king, kill the rival, and you will claim the kingdom." Yeah, of course, this is how things were done. An eye for an eye, kill or be killed. Saul was trying to kill David. He deserved to die at David's hand. Nobody would think anything of it. David snuck up behind Saul, raised his knife, but he couldn't do it. Instead, David cut off a corner of Saul's robe, just to prove that he was there, he was this close, and then he slipped back into the depths of the cave. When Saul finished up and left the cave, David cautiously came to the mouth of the cave and shouted for Saul's attention, holding up the cut piece of the robe. "Look, I'm not your enemy. I was right there. I could have killed you, but I didn't, because you are the king, my king. You are chosen by God. I'm not going to fight you. God might judge you, but I won't." Saul was amazed, and he led his armies away. He left David alone for a while, and then he resumed trying to kill him. But to the very end of Saul's life, David refused to retaliate. And when Saul died, when he was killed in battle against the Philistines, David wept. This was his king, father of his best friend, his father-in-law. He never wanted them to be enemies. He always treated Saul better than Saul treated him. I will call that the virtue of grace. Compassion, generosity, giving better than is deserved, thinking the best of others and treating them accordingly. That's one of the best virtues of King David. Not always. Sometimes he was brutal and ruthless, but often David gave grace to others, and surprisingly toward himself as well. Through the Psalms attributed to David, we are given this picture of a person very aware of his own limitations and failures. He knows that his hands are bloody. He feels that his own heart is selfish. He sees that his wisdom and his capacity for change is limited. And yet he also writes things like this from Psalm 103. "The Lord is compassionate and merciful, very patient, full of faithful love. God won't always play the judge, won't be angry forever. God doesn't deal with us according to our sin or repay us according to our wrongdoing. Because as high as the heaven is above the earth, that's how large God's faithful love is for those who are afraid. As far as east is from west, that's how far God has removed our sin from us. Like a parent feels compassion for their children, that's how the Lord feels compassion for those who fear God. Because God knows how we are made. God remembers we are just dust." David's sins were enormous, and David knew the grace of God for others and for himself that was even bigger. What do you think of grace as a virtue? Where do you see grace as a gift in our world and in yourself? Passion, strength, and grace. May God grant us the freedom to explore and express our passions. May God's strength fill us with courage and assurance. And may we know and share the grace and compassion with which God holds us all. David shared his heart with God, every feeling high or low, and there's something very bright and cozy about belonging with someone who has seen your whole heart. May it be.